Welcome, dear listener. This is Mindleapic, your quiet place for gentle historical sleep stories. Thank you for joining me tonight. If this feels right for you, perhaps give the video a soft like and consider subscribing so these calm evenings can find you again. In the comments below, I would love to hear which city or country you are listening from. It always warms me to know where these words are drifting off to sleep with you. Now, settle in. Dim the lights if you wish. Let your body find its comfortable shape against the pillows and blankets. Breathe slowly, in and out. Allow the day to slip away like petals on still water. Tonight, we drift into old Japan during the long, peaceful years of the Edo period. We rest in the gentle world of a merchant family, in their modest yet cared-for home, where cherry blossoms drift softly across a small garden. There is no hurry here, only the quiet turning of seasons, the soft sounds of daily life, and the calm beauty of ordinary moments. Let us begin. Part 1. In the heart of Edo, where narrow streets wound between wooden houses, there lived a merchant named Hiroshi and his family. Their home stood quietly along one of the calmer canals, not far from the bustling markets, but far enough for peace to settle in the evenings. The house was built in the old style, low, with sliding paper screens and a tiled roof that curved gently at the edges. At the back lay their small garden, tended with care, where a few cherry trees grew. Each spring, when the blossoms opened, pale pink petals would float down like slow snow. Hiroshi's wife, Akiko, would watch them from the engawa, the wooden veranda that looked out over the garden. She liked the way the light softened through the branches, turning everything a gentle hue. Their two children, young Miko and little Kenji, would sometimes sit there too, folding paper or simply gazing upward. The family rose with the first pale light of morning. Hiroshi would slide open the screens to let in the cool air. He wore a simple cotton kimono, dark blue, tied neatly. Merchants like him were not allowed silk by law, though some richer ones quietly bent the rules. Hiroshi preferred the plainness. It felt honest. Akiko moved through the house with soft footsteps. She prepared the morning meal: steamed rice, a small bowl of miso soup with tofu and seaweed, perhaps a pickled vegetable or two. The smells drifted gently: warm rice, faint salt, the earthiness of the miso. The children helped set the low table, placing bowls carefully so nothing clinked too loudly. After eating, Hiroshi would walk to his shop in the nearby ward. He sold fine lacquerware, boxes, trays, small combs, things that people bought for special days or gifts. He did not shout his wares like some merchants. He waited calmly for customers, bowing politely, speaking in low voices. The shop had wooden shelves polished smooth by years of careful hands. Lanterns hung from the beams, ready for evening. Back at home, Akiko swept the tatami mats with a soft broom made of grass. The sound was rhythmic, almost like a lullaby. She aired the futons, folding them away into the closets. Miko learned from her mother how to fold the bedding just so. Neat corners, no wrinkles. Kenji, still small, carried the smaller cushions, proud of his task. In the garden, Akiko tended the plants. She watered the moss that grew between stones, trimmed the low azalea bushes, raked the gravel into gentle patterns that looked like ripples on water. The cherry trees stood at the far end. In spring, their branches bowed with flowers. Even now, in other seasons, their leaves whispered in the breeze. As the sun climbed higher, the neighborhood grew quiet during the midday rest. Distant temple bells rang once, twice, slow and deep. Hiroshi sometimes returned home for a simple lunch. Rice balls wrapped in nori, green tea poured from a clay pot. The family ate together on the Ngawa when the weather allowed, watching clouds move slowly across the sky. Afternoons passed in small, steady ways. Akiko might mend a hem or weave a small mat. The children practiced writing characters with ink and brush, their tongues peeking out in concentration. Hiroshi, back at the shop, wrapped purchases in soft paper, tied with string in careful knots. Customers came and went. Housewives choosing a tray, a young woman seeking a comb for her hair. When evening came, the lanterns were lit. Their warm glow spread across the wooden floors. The family gathered again for supper. Grilled fish, more rice, perhaps a few slices of daikon simmered gently. They spoke softly of the day, what sold well, what the children had learned, how the garden looked after the rain. After the meal, they might sit in the garden if the air was mild. Cherry blossoms, when in season, would drift down one by one. Akiko would catch them in her palm sometimes, showing the children how each petal was perfect and brief. Hiroshi would smile quietly, content. The night deepened. Crickets sang in the garden corners. A soft wind moved through the branches. The family prepared for sleep, folding screens, dimming lanterns until only one small flame remained. They lay on their futons, the house settling around them like a quiet embrace. Outside, the cherry petals continued their slow fall, covering the moss and stones in pale softness. Everything was as it should be, simple, gentle, unchanging in its rhythm. The seasons in Edo turned slowly, each one bringing its own quiet rhythm to the merchant's garden and home. After the cherry blossoms had finished their gentle fall, the trees stood green and full through the warm months. Their leaves caught the sunlight in soft patterns across the moss-covered stones. Akiko would sometimes pause in her morning tasks to listen to the faint rustle. When a breeze passed through, it was a sound like distant silk being unfolded. Summer mornings carried the scent of wet earth after night rain. Hiroshi opened the screens early, letting the coolness linger before the day grew warm. He walked the same path to his shop each day, past low wooden fences, under the eaves of neighboring houses where laundry hung in neat rows. The canal water moved lazily beside the street, reflecting the pale sky. At home, Akiko prepared the house for the heat. She hung thin reed screens at the windows to soften the strong sun. The tatami mats felt cool under bare feet. Miko helped her mother fan the charcoal in the small hibachi so the tea water would heat without too much smoke. Kenji liked to watch the tiny sparks, though Akiko always reminded him to keep his fingers back. Lunch in summer was light. Cold tofu with a drizzle of soy, cucumber slices pickled overnight. Rice cooled in a wooden bowl. They ate on the Ngawa, where a bamboo shade kept the direct light away. Sometimes a cicada would call from one of the trees, its steady drone rising and falling like a slow breath. No one spoke much during these moments. The sound was enough. In the afternoon, when the sun was highest, the neighborhood grew still. Shops closed their front shutters part way. People rested behind closed screens or sat with small fans moving in lazy circles. Akiko might take a short nap on a thin mat in the shaded room, the children lying nearby. The house breathed quietly. With them, wood creaking faintly as it settled in the warmth. Hiroshi, at his shop, kept a small fan of folded paper beside him. He used it slowly, more to move the air than to cool himself quickly. Customers came less often in the heat of the day, so he polished the lacquer pieces one by one. Each stroke of the soft cloth brought out a deeper shine. The smell of the lacquer was faint and familiar, like old rain on wood. When evening arrived, the air softened again. Lanterns were lit along the streets, their warm light pooling on the ground. Hiroshi walked home under a sky turning slowly from blue to deep indigo. Fireflies sometimes appeared near the canal, tiny moving stars close to the water. He never tried to catch them. He simply watched as they drifted past. At home, supper waited. Akiko grilled small river fish over the charcoal, their skin crisp and golden. There was chilled salmon noodles in a clear broth, mint leaves floating on top. The family ate together as the garden grew dark. A single lantern hung from the eaves, casting gentle shadows across the gravel and stones. After the meal, they sometimes walked in the garden together. The moss felt soft under their Gaeta sandals. Akiko pointed out where new shoots had appeared among the rocks. Miko liked to trace the raked patterns with her finger, careful not to disturb them too much. Kenji followed behind, stepping only where the others had stepped. As night deepened, the crickets returned to their chorus. The sound came from every corner of the garden. Steady, overlapping, never hurried. Hiroshi and Akiko sat on the Engawa for a while longer, listening. The children, growing sleepy, leaned against their mother. One by one, they prepared for bed. Futons were unrolled onto the tatami. Cotton yukata replaced daytime kimono. The last lantern was lowered to a faint glow. Outside, the summer stars appeared one at a time above the cherry trees. The leaves moved slightly in the night air. Everything waited patiently for morning to come again. Slow, gentle, and without rush. The house held them all in its quiet arms as sleep settled over the family like fine silk. Autumn arrived in the merchant's garden with a slower, deeper quiet. The cherry trees held their leaves longer than one might expect, turning first to soft yellow, then to shades of warm copper and faded rose. Each morning, a few more drifted down to join the others already resting on the moss and gravel. Akiko swept them gently into small piles, never rushing, letting the broom move in the same unhurried arc, day after day. The sound was dry and whispering, like pages turning in an old book no one was reading aloud. Hiroshi noticed the change in the air first thing upon waking. It carried a faint crispness now, a reminder that summer's heavy warmth had slipped away during the night. He opened the screens just a little wider, allowing the cool breath to move through the rooms. The tatami gave off their familiar grass scent, sharpened slightly by the drier season. Akiko prepared breakfast as always. Rice still warm from the pot, a bowl of simmered root vegetables sweetened with a touch of mirin, perhaps a small piece of grilled mackerel left from the day before. The miso this morning tasted deeper, earthier, as though the season itself had settled into the broth. The children ate slowly, watching the leaves outside twist and fall in their own time. Miko pointed to one that spun lazily before landing near the stone lantern. Kenji tried to count how many had gathered since yesterday, though he always lost track halfway. Hiroshi walked to his shop under a sky the color of pale porcelain. The streets felt emptier now. Many people stayed closer to home as the days shortened. Lanterns along the canal were lit earlier each evening, their reflections stretching long and thin across the still water. At the shop, he arranged a few new pieces. Small, lacquered trays with subtle autumn patterns of maple leaves, brushed in red and gold by a quiet craftsman he had known for years. Customers lingered longer over their choices in this season, speaking in softer voices, as though the falling leaves outside asked for the same gentleness indoors. Back at home, Akiko folded summer kimono away into cedar chests, replacing them with thicker layers for the coming chill. She aired the heavier futons, beating them softly with a small bamboo tool until faint. Clouds of dust drifted upward and away. Miko helped spread them in the sun that still reached the garden in the late morning. The light came at a lower angle now, stretching shadows longer across the stones and moss. In the afternoon, when the neighborhood grew hushed, Akiko sometimes sat on the engawa with a small brazier of charcoal burning low. She warmed her hands over it, while watching the leaves continue their slow descent. The children practiced their characters near her, ink brushes moving carefully across thin paper. The quiet scratch of bristles was the only sound for long stretches, broken now and then by the distant call of a crow flying overhead. Hiroshi returned home as the sky turned the color of old bronze. He carried a small paper-wrapped package, persimmons, bought from a vendor near the market, their skins a deep, glowing orange. Akiko sliced them thinly and arranged the pieces on a lacquered plate. The family ate them slowly, tasting the sweet sharpness that only autumn brought. Juice sometimes dripped onto fingers, cool and sticky. No one minded. As evening settled, they lit the lanterns earlier. Their warm light glowed against the darkening garden, catching on the remaining leaves still clinging to the branches. A soft wind moved through, sending more petals and leaves spiraling down in slow spirals. Akiko gathered a few of the prettiest ones, those with the richest color, and pressed them. Between the pages of an old poetry collection she kept on a low shelf. Supper was simple and warming. Rice, porridge flavored with shiitake and green onion, a small dish of steamed pumpkin, hot tea poured into cups that had been warmed first. They ate close to the hibachi, feeling the gentle heat against their knees. Conversation drifted like the leaves outside. Small observations about the day, the way the canal looked silver under moonlight, how the children's writing had improved. After the meal, they stepped into the garden together for a moment. The air smelled of earth and fading green. A single lantern hung from the eaves, its paper shade trembling faintly. The family stood quietly, watching the last light leave the sky. One by one, more leaves fell, covering the moss in a thin, rustling blanket. Night came fully then. Crickets had grown quieter. In their place came the soft chirp of bell crickets hidden among the stones. The sound was small and steady, like tiny bells rung far away. Futons were spread, lanterns dimmed to the faintest glow. The house grew still, holding the family in its familiar embrace. Outside, the cherry trees, now almost bare, stood patient against the stars. Their branches traced dark lines across the night sky. Leaves continued to fall, one by one, through the long hours, covering the garden in soft silence until morning. Winter came to the merchant's garden with a soft, steady hush. The cherry trees stood bare now, their branches tracing thin, dark lines against pale gray skies. Snow arrived in small, quiet falls. Never heavy, never sudden. Flakes drifted down like forgotten thoughts, settling lightly on the moss, the stones, the low roof tiles. Each morning the garden appeared newly covered in a thin white veil that softened every edge. Hiroshi woke to the faint sound of snow sliding from the eaves. He opened the screens carefully, only enough to let in the cold, clean air. It carried no scent at first, just the pure stillness that winter brings. He closed them again soon after, preferring the warmth held inside the house. The tatami felt cooler underfoot, so he moved slowly, letting his body adjust. Akiko prepared breakfast near the hibachi. The small fire burned steadily, its low crackle the only lively sound. She warmed rice left from the night before, stirring in a little hot water to make it soft again. There was a bowl of thick miso with cubes of daikon that had simmered until tender, and a few slices of salted salmon grilled just enough to crisp the skin. Steam rose gently from the bowls, curling in the cool room air. The children sat closer to the heat, their small hands wrapped around warm cups of tea. Outside, the neighborhood moved even more slowly. Footsteps on the narrow paths sounded muffled, as though the snow absorbed every noise. Hiroshi walked to his shop with an extra layer beneath his kimono, a padded cotton jacket Akiko had sewn for him months earlier. The canal had frozen along its edges, thin ice catching the weak winter sun in faint sparkles. He passed few people. Most stayed indoors, tending small fires and quiet tasks. At the shop, he kept the braziers burning low. Customers came wrapped in thick haori, their breath visible as they spoke. They chose lacquerware that felt warm to the touch, small boxes for keeping tea or incense, trays polished to a deep, soft shine. Hiroshi wrapped each purchase slowly, folding the paper with the same careful creases he had used for years. The shop smelled faintly of charcoal smoke and old wood, comforting in the cold season. Back home, Akiko kept the house tidy and warm. She hung thick Norin curtains at the entrance to hold the heat inside. Miko helped her mother mend winter kimono, stitching small tears with fine thread. Their needles moved in slow, even rhythm. Push, pull, knot, repeat. Kenji practiced folding origami near the hibachi, making simple cranes from scraps of paper. He placed them on the low table, where they stood in neat rows like tiny white guardians. Midday brought the briefest sunlight. Akiko opened the screens facing the garden for a short while, letting pale light fall across the tatami. Snow still clung to the cherry branches in small clumps. When a gentle breeze stirred, flakes fell in quiet showers, dusting the moss anew. She watched from the engawa, a shawl around her shoulders, breathing the cold air in small sips. In the afternoon, the house grew dim early. Lanterns were lit sooner, their paper shades glowing softly against the wooden walls. Akiko prepared a kettle of hot water over the charcoal. She steeped dried persimmon leaves for tea. Its color a gentle amber, its taste faintly sweet and earthy. The family sipped slowly, feeling the warmth spread from cup to hands to chest. Supper was warming and simple. Root vegetables simmered in dashi until soft. Rice cooked with a little barley for heartiness. A small dish of namasu, pickled daikon and carrot cut into fine threads. They ate close together, the hibachi between them, its heat rising in gentle waves. Conversation stayed small and calm. How the snow looked on the canal, the way the children's cranes had multiplied. A neighbor's new grandchild mentioned in passing. After the meal, they sometimes sat longer by the fire. Akiko read from an old book of seasonal poems, her voice low and even. The words moved like snowflakes themselves, light, unhurried, settling quietly in the mind. Miko leaned against her mother. Kenji rested his head on Hiroshi's knee. The lantern light flickered across their faces, warm and steady. When it was time for sleep, futons were laid closer to the hibachi's lingering warmth. Extra blankets were unfolded, thick cotton quilts filled with silk floss. The house settled into deeper silence. Outside, snow continued to fall in the gentlest way, flake by flake, covering the garden once more. The bare cherry trees stood patient under their white burden. No wind disturbed them now. The world waited, wrapped in quiet cold, for the slow return of longer days. Inside, the family breathed together in sleep. Slow inhales, slower exhales, matching the rhythm of winter itself. Spring returned to the merchant's garden as gently as a sigh after long sleep. The bare branches of the cherry trees began to soften first. Tiny buds appeared along the twigs, small, tight, the color of pale rose quartz. Each day, Hiroshi noticed one or two more had opened overnight. He never pointed them out loudly. He simply let his gaze rest there a moment longer while opening the screens at dawn. The air carried the faintest sweetness now, mixed with the clean smell of thawing earth. Akiko felt the change in her morning movements. She stepped lighter across the tatami, humming a quiet tune without realizing it. Breakfast included fresh young greens gathered from the market, tiny spinach leaves, blanched briefly and dressed with soy and a drop of sesame oil. The rice was cooked a touch softer, steam rising in slow curls that caught the new light pouring through the paper screens. Miko and Kenji knelt closer to the low table, eyes bright with the promise of warmer days. The children ran to the garden after the meal. They walked carefully along the stepping stones so as not to disturb the moss. Kenji crouched near the base of one cherry tree, watching a single bud tremble as a drop of morning dew slid from a higher branch. Miko gathered a few fallen twigs to add to their small collection kept in a lacquered box. They spoke in whispers, as though the trees themselves might be listening. Hiroshi left for his shop later than usual in these first warm weeks. The streets of Edo felt alive again. Vendors, setting out fresh bamboo shoots and early radishes. Women hanging laundry that fluttered like soft flags in the breeze. The canal water moved with a clearer sparkle, reflecting the opening sky. At the shop, customers lingered to talk about the coming blossoms. They asked after Hiroshi's family, mentioned their own gardens. He answered calmly, bowing slightly each time, his hands folding paper around small purchases with the same steady care. Akiko spent longer hours in the garden now. She raked the gravel once more, smoothing the patterns into gentle waves that seemed to flow toward the cherry trees. She pruned away the smallest dead branches with careful snips, letting them fall softly into her basket. The moss had greened deeper over winter. She brushed it lightly with a soft broom to lift any lingering dust. When the sun reached its gentle midday height, she sat on the engawa with a cup of tea, watching the buds continue their slow unfurling. Miko helped her mother prepare the house for guests, who might come during Hanami, the flower viewing season. They wiped the wooden beams until they gleamed faintly. They aired the summer cushions, beating them softly until faint puffs of winter scent drifted away. Kenji carried small buckets of water to moisten the stones near the trees, making sure everything looked fresh and welcoming. As the first true blossoms opened, the garden changed again. Pale pink petals appeared one by one, then in small clusters, until whole branches seemed wrapped in soft cloud. The light beneath the trees turned gentle and diffused, everything bathed in a rosy glow. Akiko stood beneath them in the late afternoon, arms loose at her sides, letting petals settle on her hair and shoulders. She did not brush them away. Hiroshi returned home earlier on these blossom days. He brought a small bottle of sake bought from a trusted brewer. Clear, lightly sweet, meant to be sipped slowly under the trees. The family gathered on the engawa as the sun began its quiet descent. They spread a thin mat and placed low trays with simple foods, rice balls shaped by hand, slices of cucumber pickled with shiso, small pieces of mochi dusted with kinako. They ate without hurry. Petals drifted down in ones and twos, landing on the mat, on their sleeves, on the rim of the sake cups. Hiroshi poured a little for Akiko, then for himself. The children drank barley tea from tiny cups. No one spoke much. The sound of petals touching the moss was softer than breathing. When the sky turned the color of peach and lavender, lanterns were lit along the garden path. Their warm light mixed with the fading blossom glow, creating pools of gentle color. The family remained outside a little longer, watching the petals continue their slow fall. Miko caught one in her palm and held it up to the lantern light, its veins delicate as spider silk. Kenji leaned against his father, eyes growing heavy but unwilling to leave the sight. Night arrived fully, carrying the scent of blossoms deeper into the house. Futons were spread as usual, but the screens facing the garden were left open a crack. Cool air slipped in, carrying the faint perfume. Crickets had returned in small numbers. Their song wove through the branches like fine thread. The family lay down together. Akiko pulled the quilts higher against the night chill. Hiroshi's hand rested lightly on hers for a moment. The children sighed once, twice, then settled into stillness. Outside, the cherry trees released more petals through the dark hours. They fell silently, covering the moss, the stones, the gravel in layers of pale softness. By morning, the garden would wear its brief, perfect coat of pink. Beautiful, quiet, and already beginning to fade. Inside, sleep came easily, carried on the same gentle rhythm as the drifting blossoms. The cherry blossoms held their full beauty for only a handful of days each year. Even as the petals continued their slow drift downward, new green leaves began to push through beneath them. The garden shifted from pale pink to tender emerald, almost without notice. One morning, the branches carried mostly flowers. By the next afternoon, green had quietly claimed more space. Akiko watched this gentle handover from the Ngawa each day, never hurrying the change, simply letting it unfold. Hiroshi opened the screens wider now. Warm breezes moved freely through the house, carrying the fresh scent of young leaves and distant wisteria, blooming along nearby fences. Breakfast felt lighter still. Rice topped with a sprinkle of toasted sesame, a small bowl of clear soup with floating bits of green onion, fresh strawberries from the market sliced thinly and arranged like petals on a plate. The children ate with small smiles, their chopsticks moving slowly as they looked out at the changing garden. Miko and Kenji spent more time outside after the meal. They walked the narrow paths between the stones, pausing to examine the new leaves unfurling like tiny fans. Kenji liked to touch them with the lightest fingertip, feeling their softness before they grew firmer. Miko gathered fallen petals that had not yet turned brown, pressing them between her palms until the faint fragrance stayed on her skin. They spoke in quiet voices, pointing out a butterfly that rested briefly on a stone before fluttering on. Akiko tended the garden with extra care in these weeks. She watered the moss early, before the sun grew too strong, letting droplets catch the light like scattered jewels. She trimmed the low azaleas, so their buds could open freely, small pink and white, promises waiting beneath the leaves. The gravel patterns she raked each morning were simpler now, gentle curves that echoed the shape of drifting petals. When she finished, she sat for a while on a low stool, listening to the soft rustle of leaves overhead. Hiroshi's shop saw more visitors as spring deepened. People came looking for lacquerware to give as gifts, boxes for holding, new season tea, combs carved with subtle floral designs. He greeted each one with the same calm bow, speaking in measured tones. The shop stayed cool inside, the wooden floors smooth underfoot. Lanterns hung unlit during the day, their paper shades catching slanted sunlight in soft gold. He polished pieces slowly, the cloth moving in steady circles, bringing out depths of black and red that seemed to hold the season's light. In the afternoons, the house grew warm and drowsy. Akiko hung reed blinds at the windows to filter the stronger sun. The tatami gave off their clean, grassy smell mixed now with the green scent drifting in from outside. She sometimes napped briefly with the children nearby, all three lying on thin mats near the open screens. A faint breeze moved the blinds in slow waves, casting shifting shadows across their still forms. When Hiroshi returned home, the family often gathered in the garden before supper. They sat on the engawa with small trays of snacks, sweet bean, paste wrapped in thin mochi, green tea poured cool into cups. Petals still fell now and then, though fewer each day. One landed on Kenji's sleeve. He left it there, watching it slowly curl as the warmth of his arm touched it. Akiko smiled quietly, her hand resting on Miko's shoulder. Supper came as the light began to fade. Grilled ayu fish from the river, their skin crisp and fragrant, rice steamed with young peas, a side of simmered bamboo shoots cut into fine slivers. They ate, facing the garden, where the cherry trees now wore full green dresses. The leaves moved gently in the evening air, whispering secrets only they knew. After the meal, they sometimes walked together along the canal path near their home. The water reflected the last colors of sunset. Soft rose, pale lavender, deepening blue. Fireflies had not yet appeared, but the air held a promise of them. Hiroshi carried a small lantern to light their way back. Its glow swayed gently with each step, painting brief circles on the ground. At home, lanterns were lit inside. The family sat for a short while longer, listening to the evening settle. A distant temple bell rang once, low, slow, fading into silence. Crickets began their night song from hidden places among the stones. The sound rose and fell like gentle breathing. Futons were unrolled as usual. The quilts felt lighter now, cotton rather than thick winter layers. Akiko smoothed them carefully, tucking the edges just so. The children yawned, their eyelids growing heavy with the day's quiet warmth. Hiroshi dimmed the last lantern until only a faint ember remained. The screens stayed open to the garden through the night. Cool air slipped in, carrying the scent of green leaves and lingering blossoms. A single petal, late to fall, drifted through the opening and settled on the tatami near the sleeping family. Outside, the cherry trees stood tall and full-leaved under the stars. Their branches moved in the smallest breeze, leaves rustling like soft pages turned by an unseen hand. The garden rested, patient and green, already dreaming of the next season's quiet return. Inside, sleep wrapped around them slowly, deep, even, unbroken, matching the steady rhythm of leaves in the night wind. Summer deepened around the merchant's home, wrapping the garden in steady, warm quiet. The cherry trees now stood in full leaf, deep green, broad, casting wide pools of shade across the moss and stones. Sunlight filtered through in soft, dappled patterns that shifted slowly with the hours. No more petals drifted. Instead, the leaves rustled in low, constant conversation whenever a breeze passed. The sound was familiar, comforting, like the gentle turning of pages in a book left open on a windowsill. Hiroshi rose with the earliest light, before the heat gathered strength. He slid the screens wide to welcome the cool morning air that still lingered. It carried the faint scent of dew on leaves and distant river water. Akiko moved quietly through the house, her cotton yukata light against her skin. She prepared breakfast near the open engawa. Cold rice from the night before, shaped into small onigiri with a touch of umeboshi tucked inside. A bowl of chilled miso thinned with extra water. Slices of cucumber crisp and cool. The children ate sitting on the veranda floorboards, legs dangling over the edge, watching tiny insects move among the moss. The neighborhood stirred slowly. Shopkeepers raised their shutters with soft clacks. Children's voices drifted from farther streets. Light laughter, the pat of bare feet on packed earth. Hiroshi walked his usual path to the shop, passing under low-hanging eaves where morning glories opened pale blue trumpets toward the sun. The canal reflected the clear sky perfectly now, its surface smooth as polished lacquer. At the shop, the air stayed cooler behind thick wooden walls. Hiroshi lit no lanterns during the brightest hours. Daylight slanted in through narrow gaps in the shutters. Customers sought lighter pieces in summer. Small trays for serving chilled sweets, fans with lacquered handles that felt smooth in the hand. He spoke with them in his usual calm way, offering tea from a clay pot kept cool in the shade. The wrapping paper he used was thinner now, almost translucent, folding with the lightest touch. Back home, Akiko kept the house shaded and airy. She hung bamboo blinds that swayed with each breath of wind, casting long, moving stripes of light across the tatami. Miko helped sweep the floors with a soft grass broom, the rhythm steady, almost meditative. Kenji carried small bowls of water to sprinkle over the garden stones, watching droplets bead and roll before sinking into the moss. The act was small, repeated daily, never rushed. Midday brought the fullest heat. The neighborhood fell quiet again. Shops dimmed their fronts. People retreated to cooler rooms or napped behind closed screens. Akiko prepared a light lunch. Salmon noodles rinsed in cold water, served with a dipping sauce of soy, mirin, and grated ginger. They ate on the engawa under the deep shade of the cherry trees. A cicada chorus rose in waves from nearby branches, high and steady, then fading, then rising once more. The family listened without comment, letting the sound wash over them like warm water. In the drowsy afternoon, Akiko sometimes sat with a small fan of folded paper, moving it slowly back and forth. The children lay nearby on thin mats, eyes half closed, listening to the leaves overhead. A faint breeze stirred now and then, lifting strands of Miko's hair, rustling Kenji's sleeve. The house breathed with them. Wood expanding slightly in the warmth, screens creaking once in a long while. Hiroshi returned as the sun began its slow descent. The sky softened to pale gold at the edges. He carried a small bundle, fresh peaches from the market, their skins fuzzy and warm from the day. Akiko sliced them carefully, juice running clear and sweet along the knife. The family shared the pieces on the engawa, eating slowly, tasting the summer ripeness. A drop sometimes fell onto the wooden boards. No one wiped it away. It would dry in its own time. As evening arrived, the heat eased. Lanterns were lit along garden paths and under the eaves. Their light glowed softly against the green leaves, turning them a deeper shade. Supper was simple. Grilled eggplant brushed with miso, rice steamed with shiso leaves, a clear soup with cubes of chilled tofu. They ate facing the garden, where fireflies had begun to appear in small numbers. Tiny lights blinked on and off among the stones and low bushes. Slow, patient, never hurried. After the meal, they remained outside longer. Hiroshi poured cool barley tea into cups. Akiko fanned herself gently with one hand while holding her cup in the other. The children watched the fireflies, pointing quietly when one drifted close. Miko whispered their name, Hotaru, though speaking too loudly might frighten them away. Kenji tried to follow one with his eyes until it vanished into the dark leaves. Night settled fully. The cicadas quieted. Crickets took their place with a finer, higher song. A soft wind moved through the cherry branches, stirring the leaves in a long, slow sigh. The family stepped inside only when the air grew noticeably cooler. Futons were spread near the open screens. Quilts were light cotton, barely needed. Akiko tucked the children in with gentle hands. Hiroshi dimmed the lanterns until their glow was no brighter than moonlight. The house grew still, holding the day's warmth in its wooden bones. Outside, fireflies continued their quiet dance above the moss. The cherry trees stood tall and green under a sky thick with stars. Leaves rustled faintly through the night hours, a lullaby that needed no words. Inside, the family slept deeply, breaths slow and even, matching the gentle rise and fall of summer itself. The warm season lingered in the merchant's garden, days stretching long and golden before the first hint of shorter evenings appeared. The cherry trees held their deep green canopy high, leaves thick and glossy from summer rains that came in soft, passing showers. After each rain, the moss between the stones looked freshly washed, a richer shade of emerald. Droplets clung to leaf edges for a while, catching sunlight in tiny prisms before they fell one by one to the ground. Akiko liked to watch them from the engawa, her hands resting still in her lap, letting time move at its own pace. Hiroshi opened the house early each morning to the same gentle warmth. The air carried the scent of wet earth and blooming lotuses from the nearby canal. Breakfast remained simple and cooling. Cold tofu dressed with ginger and scallions, rice balls wrapped in nori, a small dish of chilled wakame seaweed. The family ate slowly on the veranda, bare feet against the smooth wood, listening to the faint drip of leftover rain from the eaves. Miko traced patterns in a drop of water that had pooled near her knee. Kenji watched a dragonfly hover briefly above the stones before drifting away. The streets of Edo hummed with quiet summer life. Vendors pushed carts of shaved ice flavored with sweet syrups, their wooden wheels rolling softly over packed earth. Hiroshi passed them on his way to the shop, nodding politely without stopping. Inside his shop, the air felt still and shaded. He kept a small basin of water nearby to dampen a cloth for wiping dust from the lacquer pieces. Each stroke was deliberate, bringing out the subtle gleam that caught the slanted light. Customers came in short visits now, seeking small gifts for festivals, or simply to escape the midday heat for a moment. He offered them cool tea in unglazed cups, speaking in low, even tones. At home, Akiko moved through her tasks with the lightest touch. She aired the summer kimono on bamboo poles in the garden shade, letting the breeze carry away any lingering warmth from the weave. Miko helped fold them afterward, her small hands pressing the fabric flat with care. Kenji watered the low plants with a tiny wooden ladle, pouring slowly so the water soaked in rather than ran off. The garden drank quietly, moss swelling slightly with each gentle offering. When the sun stood highest, the house grew hushed. Akiko lowered the reed blinds fully, turning the rooms into cool, dim caves of green-tinted light. The tatami felt smooth and slightly damp under bare skin. She sometimes read aloud from a thin volume of old tales, stories of gentle spirits and quiet rivers, her voice soft as falling rain. The children listened half dozing, heads resting on folded arms, eyelids fluttering with the rhythm of her words. A single cicada called from somewhere high in the cherry branches. Its song rose, held, then faded into silence before beginning again far away. Hiroshi returned as shadows lengthened across the garden. The sky had softened to a pale, milky blue at the edges. He brought home a small bundle of lotus root from the market, white and crisp, still carrying the faint scent of pond water. Akiko sliced it thinly, simmering the pieces briefly, in dashi with a touch of mirin, until they turned translucent. Supper included this along with cold soba noodles dipped in nutty sauce, grilled shiitake caps brushed with soy, and fresh cucumber cut into delicate fans. They ate facing the open garden, where the leaves now caught the late light in soft gold flecks. After the meal, the family lingered outside. A few fireflies had grown bolder, their lights appearing earlier each evening. They blinked slowly among the lower branches and near the stone lantern, tiny pulses of pale green. Hiroshi lit a single paper lantern and hung it from the eaves. Its warm glow met the cool firefly lights in quiet harmony. Akiko fanned herself with slow, even strokes while Miko and Kenji sat cross-legged on the mat, watching the small lights appear and vanish. No one tried to catch them. Watching was enough. As night deepened, the air cooled by degrees. The cicada chorus thinned. Crickets answered from hidden places in the moss. A soft wind stirred the cherry leaves, sending a long, whispering sigh through the garden. The family stepped inside only when the first true chill touched their skin. Futons were spread near the open screens, quilts folded loosely at the foot. Akiko smoothed the bedding with gentle hands, tucking edges just enough to hold warmth without confining. Hiroshi lowered the lanterns one by one, until only the faintest glow remained, enough to see the outlines of familiar shapes, nothing more. The house settled into its nighttime quiet, wood creaking once or twice as it cooled. Outside, fireflies continued their slow dance above the stones. The cherry trees stood motionless under a sky heavy with stars. Leaves rustled faintly now and then, a sound so soft it blended with breathing. Inside, the family drifted toward sleep. Breaths grew slower, deeper. Hiroshi's steady, Akiko's gentle, the children's light and even. The garden held its own quiet vigil, green and warm, waiting patiently for the season to turn once more in its own unhurried time. Autumn returned once more to the merchant's garden, arriving in whispers rather than announcements. The cherry leaves, so deeply green through summer, began their slow change without hurry. First came faint hints of gold at the edges, then soft washes of amber spreading inward like spilled honey. Each morning, Hiroshi paused at the open screens to notice how many more leaves had deepened overnight. The air carried a new crispness now. Clean, slightly nutty, the scent of ripening persimmons drifting from nearby gardens. Akiko prepared breakfast with the warmth of the season in mind. Rice still steamed gently from the pot, topped with a few roasted chestnuts crumbled over the top. There was a small bowl of simmered kabocha squash sweetened with a touch of mirin, and miso thickened with bits of tofu and wakame. The family gathered close to the low table, cups of hot green tea cradled in both hands. Steam rose in slow spirals, warming their faces as they ate. Miko watched a single leaf detach from a branch outside and spin slowly to the moss below. Kenji counted the chestnuts on his rice before taking the first bite. The neighborhood moved with the same gentle pace. Hiroshi walked to his shop under skies that had turned a deeper, softer blue. Leaves drifted across the narrow paths, rustling under his geta with a dry, papery sound. The canal reflected, the turning colors along its banks. Gold and copper mirrored in still water. At the shop, customers lingered longer again, drawn by the season's quiet beauty. They chose lacquer trays painted with subtle maple motifs, small boxes for moon-viewing sweets. Hiroshi wrapped each one carefully, tying the string in neat bows that sat flat and perfect. He spoke softly, asking after their families, mentioning the fine weather for viewing the leaves. At home, Akiko swept the garden paths each morning. The broom moved in wide, slow arcs, gathering fallen leaves into small piles that she carried to a corner compost heap. She left the prettiest ones, those with the richest reds and golds, scattered across the moss for beauty's sake. Miko helped her mother press a few between thin paper sheets, stacking them carefully in a wooden box to keep their colors through the coming months. Kenji followed behind with a tiny rake, smoothing any disturbed gravel back into gentle waves. Midday light slanted lower now, stretching long shadows across the tatami when the screens were opened. Akiko aired the heavier futons briefly in the garden, beating them softly until faint dust motes danced in the sunbeams. The house smelled of sun-warmed cotton and the faint wood, smoke from distant hearths. She sometimes sat on the engawa with a small brazier, warming her hands while watching leaves continue their patient fall. The children practiced calligraphy nearby, brushes dipping into ink, strokes slow and deliberate across fresh paper. Hiroshi returned as the afternoon light turned golden and soft. He carried home a small paper bag of sweet potatoes roasted at a street stall, their skins charred, just enough, insides steaming when broken open. Akiko sliced them thinly and arranged the pieces on a lacquered plate. The family shared them on the veranda, tasting the caramelized sweetness that only autumn brought. A leaf landed beside the plate. Akiko lifted it gently and placed it on Kenji's palm. He studied its veins for a long moment before setting it aside. As evening drew near, the garden glowed in warm hues. Lanterns were lit earlier, their light catching on the remaining colored leaves and turning them to burnished copper. Supper warmed them from within. Rice porridge cooked with shiitake and burdock root. A small dish of namasu pickles, crisp and tangy. Grilled mackerel brushed with soy. They ate close to the hibachi, feeling its steady heat against their knees. Conversation stayed light. How the canal looked with leaves floating on its surface. The way the children's ink strokes had grown steadier. A neighbor's new autumn poem shared in passing. After the meal, they stepped into the garden together. The air smelled of earth and fading green, sharpened by the coolness settling in. A soft wind moved through the branches, sending more leaves spiraling down in lazy circles. Akiko caught one mid-fall and held it up to the lantern light. Its edges, translucent, veins glowing faintly. Miko and Kenji stood close, watching as others continued to fall, covering the moss in a thin, rustling carpet. Night came quietly. The crickets sang their last full songs before growing silent with the deeper cold. A single bell cricket chirped from among the stones, small, persistent, like a tiny heartbeat in the dark. The family returned inside only when the chill touched their fingertips. Futons were unrolled near the lingering warmth of the hibachi. Quilts were thicker now, cotton layered with silk floss. Akiko tucked the edges with gentle care. Hiroshi dimmed the lanterns until their glow was barely more than moonlight. Through paper, the house settled into its familiar hush, wood cooling, screens whispering faintly against their frames. Outside, leaves continued their slow descent through the night hours. They fell one by one, covering the garden in soft layers of gold and amber. The cherry trees stood almost bare again, branches dark against the stars, patient as ever. Inside, the family breathed together in sleep, slow, deep, even, wrapped in the quiet turning of the season. Winter returned to the merchant's garden with the same patient softness it always brought. The cherry trees stood bare once again, branches etched dark against skies that stayed pale and low for many days. Snow arrived in light, intermittent falls. Never a storm, only quiet accumulations that settled on the moss like fine cotton batting. Each morning, Akiko opened the screens just enough to see the garden, freshly blanketed, the stones rounded gently under white. The low azaleas bowed beneath their small burdens. The air that slipped inside was sharp and clean, carrying no sound but the faint creak of settling snow. Hiroshi woke to the hush. He moved slowly, layering an extra padded haori over his kimono before stepping out. Breakfast warmed them from within. Rice porridge thickened with a little barley, simmered daikon soft enough to break with chopsticks, a small piece of grilled herring whose skin crackled faintly when bitten. Steam rose from the bowls in slow, lazy curls. The family sat nearer the hibachi now, knees drawn close, hands wrapped around warm cups of roasted barley tea. Miko traced the edge of her cup with one finger, following the rising heat. Kenji watched his breath make small clouds that disappeared almost at once. The neighborhood moved even more quietly under winter's weight. Hiroshi walked to his shop along paths swept clean by neighbors. The evening before, snow pushed to the sides in neat, low walls. Footprints from early risers dotted the way, already softening at the edges. The canal had frozen in thin sheets along its quieter bends. Ice caught the weak sunlight in pale gleams. Few people passed. Most stayed near their hearths, tending small fires that sent thin smoke upward into the still air. At the shop, Hiroshi kept the braziers burning low and steady. The warmth spread slowly across the wooden floorboards. Customers came wrapped thickly, scarves high around their necks, speaking in muffled voices. They chose lacquer pieces that felt solid and comforting. Small incense boxes, trays for serving hot sake on cold evenings. He polished them one at a time, the cloth moving in the same unhurried circles, bringing out depths of shine that seemed to hold a little inner warmth. He offered tea from a kettle kept close to the fire, pouring it slowly into cups that had been warmed first. Back at home, Akiko kept the house wrapped against the cold. She hung heavy norin at the entrance, layered extra mats near the hibachi. Miko helped her mother mend winter garments. Small, careful stitches closing seams worn thin by seasons. Their needles moved in slow rhythm, thread pulling through fabric with the softest whisper. Kenji folded origami near the fire. Cranes, frogs, simple boats, placing each finished piece in neat rows on the low table. The paper caught the lantern light in gentle folds. Midday brought only brief, slanting light. Akiko opened the garden-facing screens for a short while, letting pale sun fall across the tatami in thin stripes. Snow still clung to the bare cherry branches in small clumps. When a faint breeze stirred, flakes drifted down in quiet flurries, dusting the moss anew. She watched from the engawa, a thick shawl around her shoulders, breathing the cold in small, measured sips. Afternoons passed in dim, warm stillness. Lanterns were lit early, their paper shades glowing softly against the wooden walls. Akiko steeped dried persimmon leaf tea, its color a gentle amber, its taste faintly sweet and grounding. The family sipped slowly, feeling warmth spread from cup to palms to chest. Conversation stayed small. The way the snow muffled every sound outside, how the children's paper figures had multiplied, the faint scent of cedar from the storage chests. Hiroshi returned home as the sky turned the soft gray of early dusk. He carried a small wrapped bundle, mandarin oranges from the market, their skins bright against the winter dullness. Akiko peeled them carefully, separating the segments and arranging them on a small plate. The citrus scent filled the room, sharp and clean. They shared the pieces slowly, juice cool and sweet on the tongue. A segment sometimes left a faint, sticky trace on fingers. No one hurried to wipe it away. As night settled fully, the garden grew even quieter. Lanterns hung from the eaves cast their warm pools across the snow-covered stones. The family stepped outside for only a moment, long enough to feel the cold, crisp, against their cheeks to hear the faint crunch of snow underfoot. No wind disturbed the branches. The bare cherry trees stood perfectly still, holding their patient outline against the dark. Supper warmed them once more. Root vegetables simmered long in rich dashi. Rice cooked soft with a handful of black beans. A small dish of spinach blanched and dressed with sesame. They ate close to the hibachi, its heat rising in gentle waves against their legs. After the meal, Akiko read from an old seasonal scroll. Short poems about snow on branches, moonlight on frozen water. Her voice low and even, words settling like flakes themselves. Futons were spread near the fire's lingering warmth. Quilts were layered thickly, edges tucked with care. Hiroshi dimmed the lanterns until only the smallest glow remained. Enough to see the familiar shapes of home, nothing more. The house grew still. Wood cooled slowly, screens whispering once against their frames. Outside, snow continued its gentle fall through the long night, flake by flake, silent, covering the garden in deeper white. Inside, the family slept wrapped in quiet. Breaths slow and deep, matching the unhurried rhythm of winter, holding the world in its calm embrace. Spring came back to the merchant's garden in its familiar, unhurried way. The bare cherry branches began to show the first signs of waking, small buds swelling along the twigs, tight and pinkish at first, then slowly loosening into pale promise. Each morning, Akiko stepped to the Engawa before the rest of the household stirred, watching for any new change. The air felt lighter now, carrying the clean scent of thawing soil and distant plum. Blossoms opening along the canal paths. Hiroshi noticed the difference too. He opened the screens wider, letting the cool, fresh breath move through the rooms without hurry. Breakfast returned to simpler, brighter flavors. Rice steamed soft and white, topped with a few young greens blanched just long enough to keep their crispness. There was a small bowl of clear soup with floating slices of shiitake and green onion, and fresh strawberries from the early market. Small, red, sweet when bitten. The family ate on the veranda, knees tucked under them, watching the light grow stronger across the moss-covered stones. Miko pointed to a bud that had begun to show color. Kenji leaned forward to see it better, his breath making faint mist in the still cool air. The neighborhood woke gently with the season. Hiroshi walked to his shop under skies that had turned a tender blue. The paths were dry now, no snow left to muffle footsteps. Cherry trees along the way showed the same slow budding. People paused beneath them, looking upward with quiet smiles. At the shop, customers began to ask after lighter lacquer, pieces, small trays for serving spring sweets, combs with subtle floral engravings. Hiroshi greeted them calmly, bowing slightly, wrapping purchases in thin paper that folded with the softest sound. The shop smelled faintly of fresh wood, and the clean polish he applied each day. Akiko spent longer in the garden these mornings. She raked the gravel into new patterns, gentle curves that flowed toward the cherry trees like slow-moving water. She watered the moss carefully, watching droplets sink in and disappear without trace. The azaleas showed tiny buds, too. She trimmed away last year's dry ends with small, precise snips. When the sun climbed higher, she sat on a low stool beneath the branches, hands resting in her lap, listening to the faint rustle of new leaves beginning to emerge. Miko and Kenji helped with small tasks. Miko carried a shallow basin of water to moisten the stones near the trees, pouring slowly so each drop spread evenly. Kenji followed with a tiny broom, brushing away any stray twigs that had fallen in the night. They worked without speaking much. The sounds of their movements blended with the garden's own quiet. breathing, water dripping, broom whispering, leaves stirring when a breeze passed. Midday brought warmer light that filtered through the still bare branches in long, soft beams. Akiko hung thin reed screens at the windows to soften the brightness. The tatami felt cool and fresh under bare feet. The children practiced their characters near the open, and gawa, brushes dipping into ink, strokes careful and slow across thin paper. Akiko sometimes joined them, guiding Miko's hand when a line wavered, her touch light as a petal. Hiroshi returned home as the afternoon softened into gold. He carried a small paper-wrapped package, early cherries from a favored vendor, their skins deep red and glossy. Akiko placed them in a shallow lacquered bowl on the low table. The family shared them slowly, tasting the first tart sweetness of the season. Juice stained fingertips faintly. They licked it away without hurry. A single bud on the nearest branch trembled as a breeze moved through. No one spoke of it, but all eyes rested there for a moment. As evening arrived, the garden began to glow in pale light. Lanterns were lit along the paths, their warm paper shades catching the last colors of sunset. Supper was light and welcoming. Grilled river fish brushed with a little salt, rice steamed with young peas, a side of simmered bamboo shoots cut into fine matchsticks. They ate facing the trees, where buds now showed more open petals, pale pink against the darkening sky. After the meal, they remained on the Engawa longer. Hiroshi poured cool barley tea into cups. Akiko fanned herself gently with one hand while holding her cup in the other. The children watched the first fireflies appear. Tiny, hesitant lights blinking among the stones. Miko whispered their name again, Hotaru, though greeting old friends returned. After a long absence, Kenji followed one with his eyes until it drifted upward into the branches. Night deepened slowly. The air grew cooler, carrying the faint perfume of opening blossoms. Crickets began their soft chorus from hidden places in the moss. A gentle wind moved through the trees, stirring the buds without disturbing them. The family stepped inside only when the chill settled on their shoulders. Futons were spread near the open screens. Quilts were light once more, cotton smooth against skin. Akiko tucked the children in with quiet care. Hiroshi dimmed the lanterns until their glow matched the faint moonlight, filtering through paper. The house grew still, wood settling, screens whispering faintly in the breeze. Outside, the cherry trees continued their slow awakening. Buds opened a little more through the dark hours, petals unfurling one by one in silence. By morning, the branches would wear the first true blossoms, soft, pale, perfect in their brief, quiet beauty. Inside, the family slept deeply. Breaths, slow and even, carried on the same gentle rhythm as the season turning once again. The cherry blossoms opened fully in the merchant's garden, as they always did in their own quiet time. By the time the first true morning of full bloom arrived, the branches wore pale pink clouds, petals soft and layered, catching the earliest light in gentle hues of rose and pearl. Hiroshi stepped to the Engawa before dawn had fully broken, watching the faint glow spread across the garden. The air held the sweetest fragrance now, light and clean, drifting through the open screens like an invitation to breathe more slowly. Akiko joined him soon after, standing close without a word. Both of them simply present as the day began to unfold. Breakfast was prepared with extra care that morning. Rice steamed until each grain shone softly, topped with a sprinkle of toasted black sesame. There was a small bowl of miso with fresh tofu cubes and young spinach leaves, and slices of the season's first strawberries, arranged like tiny jewels on a lacquered plate. The family gathered on the veranda, sitting low, knees tucked beneath them, eating without haste. Miko lifted a petal that had drifted onto the wooden boards and placed it beside her bowl. Kenji watched another settle on his sleeve and left it there, smiling faintly. No one hurried the meal. The blossoms overhead continued their slow release, petals falling one by one in perfect silence. The neighborhood felt hushed in reverence. Hiroshi walked to his shop later than usual, passing under canopies of pink that lined the streets. People moved more slowly, pausing often to look upward, their faces softened by the sight. At the shop, few customers came early. Those who did spoke in lowered voices, as though the beauty outside asked for quiet indoors. Hiroshi arranged a few special pieces on the low display shelf, small trays with subtle cherry motifs, brushed in pale pink lacquer. He polished them once more, the cloth moving in slow, familiar circles, bringing out a gentle sheen that echoed the light in the garden at home. Akiko remained in the garden through the morning hours. She swept the paths lightly, gathering only the petals that had begun to brown at the edges, leaving the freshest ones scattered across the moss like pale snow. She watered the stones near the trees, watching droplets catch the blossom light before sinking away. Miko helped her mother spread a thin mat beneath the largest branch. They sat together for a long while, backs against the Engawa posts, letting petals land on their hair and shoulders. Kenji joined them soon after, lying flat on the mat, arms spread, staring up through the branches at the endless pink above. None of them spoke much. The falling petals were conversation enough. Midday light filtered through in soft, rosy beams. The house stayed open to the garden, screens pushed wide, allowing the fragrance to fill every room. Akiko prepared a simple lunch. Cold samen noodles rinsed in fresh water, served with a dipping sauce of soy and grated daikon, small pieces of grilled eggplant brushed with miso. They ate on the mat beneath the trees, petals drifting down now and then onto the trays. One landed in Hiroshi's teacup when he returned home. He lifted it out gently with his chopsticks and set it aside without comment. The afternoon passed in drowsy stillness. The children napped briefly on the mat, heads resting on folded arms, faces turned toward the falling petals. Akiko sat nearby with a small fan, moving it slowly to stir the warm air. Hiroshi joined them after closing the shop early, sitting cross-legged, hands resting on his knees. They watched together as the blossoms continued their gentle surrender, petals spiraling down in lazy curves, covering the moss, the stones, the gravel in deepening layers of pink. The light grew warmer, softer, turning everything beneath the trees to shades of rose and gold. As evening approached, the family gathered once more on the Engawa. Hiroshi brought a small bottle of sweet sake brewed especially for Hanami. He poured it into tiny cups warmed first over the hibachi. Akiko arranged mochi dusted with kinako and a few more strawberries on a tray. They sipped and ate slowly, watching the sky shift from blue to lavender to deep indigo. Lanterns were lit along the garden paths and under the eaves. Their warm glow met the fading blossom light, creating a soft, dreamlike haze. Petals continued to fall through the growing dark, catching the lantern shine for a brief moment before settling. Miko caught one mid-air and held it to the light. Its veins glowed faintly, delicate as lace. Kenji leaned against his father, eyes heavy but open, unwilling to miss the sight. Akiko rested her head lightly on Hiroshi's shoulder for a moment. He placed his hand over hers without hurry. No words passed between them. The garden held them all in its quiet embrace. The rustle of leaves, the soft pat of petals on moss, the distant song of early crickets weaving through the branches. Night arrived fully, cool and still. The family stepped inside only when the chill touched their skin. Futons were spread near the open screens, quilts light and smooth. Akiko tucked the children in with her usual gentle hands, smoothing hair from foreheads, adjusting collars. Hiroshi dimmed the lanterns until only the faintest glow remained, enough to see the pale petals that had drifted across the tatami floor like scattered moonlight. The house settled into its deepest quiet. Wood cooled slowly, screens whispering in the night breeze. Outside, the cherry trees released more petals through the long hours, silent, steady, covering the garden in one final, perfect layer of softness. By morning, many would have fallen, the branches already beginning to show green beneath the pink. The season's brief beauty would fade gently, as it always did, making way for the next quiet turning. Inside, the family slept deeply, breaths slow, even, matching the unhurried rhythm of petals falling in the dark. The garden rested beside them, patient and serene, holding the memory of blossoms long after they were gone. Everything was as it should be. Simple, gentle, complete. The cherry blossoms began their gentle farewell to the merchant's garden, petal by petal, without any sudden farewell. In the days following full bloom, the pink clouds overhead grew thinner. Each morning brought fewer petals clinging to the branches, more resting softly on the moss below. The light beneath the trees changed slowly, from rosy glow to clearer green as new. Leaves pushed forward beneath the fading flowers. Hiroshi stood at the Engawa one early morning, watching a single petal detach and drift downward in a long, lazy spiral before settling near his feet. He did not pick it up. He simply let his gaze rest there a moment longer. Akiko moved through the house with the same quiet rhythm. Breakfast included rice still warm from the pot, topped with a few preserved plums whose tartness balanced the season's lingering sweetness. There was a small bowl of chilled tofu dressed with ginger, threads and a drizzle of soy, and young bamboo shoots simmered until tender. The family ate facing the garden, where petals continued their slow fall, one landing in Miko's hair, another on the edge of Kenji's bowl. They left them where they were, small reminders of beauty already passing. The neighborhood carried on in its calm way. Hiroshi walked to his shop under branches that now showed more green than pink. People no longer paused as often beneath the trees. The moment of wonder had softened into ordinary memory. At the shop, customers returned for everyday pieces. Lacquered trays for summer tea, small boxes for storing dried herbs. He wrapped them with the same careful folds, tying string in neat bows that sat flat against the paper. The shop felt brighter now, sunlight reaching farther across the wooden floors, without the heavy shade of full blossom. Akiko spent her mornings in the garden, sweeping the paths with gentle strokes. She gathered the browning petals into small piles, carrying them to a quiet corner where they would return to the earth. The moss drank them in slowly, turning richer green beneath the thin layer. She raked fresh patterns in the gravel, simpler waves now, echoing the new leaves overhead. Miko helped her mother water the stones, pouring from a small wooden ladle so each drop spread evenly across the surface. Kenji followed with his tiny broom, brushing away only what needed clearing, leaving most of the fallen petals to fade naturally. Midday light poured through in clearer beams. The screens stayed open wide, letting warm air move freely through the rooms. Akiko hung thin summer kimono to air on bamboo poles in the garden shade. The fabric fluttered lightly, catching the scent of green leaves and distant river water. The children practiced, their writing near the Engawa, brushes, moving slowly across paper ink strokes steady and unhurried. Akiko sometimes sat with them, guiding a hand when needed, her touch light and patient. Hiroshi returned home as the afternoon softened. He carried a small bundle, fresh green tea leaves from the market, still carrying the faint steam of roasting. Akiko steeped a little in a clay pot, pouring the bright green liquid into warmed cups. The family sipped slowly on the veranda, tasting the fresh bitterness that marked the turn of seasons. Petals drifted down now and then, fewer each hour, landing on sleeves, on trays, on the wooden boards. No one brushed them away. As evening drew near, the garden took on a different quiet. Lanterns were lit along the paths, their warm light catching the new green leaves and the last pale petals still clinging. Supper was simple and light. Cold soba noodles with a dipping sauce of grated yam and soy. Grilled eggplant slices brushed with miso. A small dish of young cucumber pickled overnight. They ate facing the trees, where branches now wore mostly green, with only scattered pink remaining like faint memories. After the meal, they remained outside a little longer. Hiroshi poured cool barley tea. Akiko fanned herself gently with slow strokes. The children watched the last fireflies of the season blink among the stones. Fewer now, their lights softer in the growing dark. Miko whispered something to one that drifted close. Kenji leaned against his mother, eyes half closed but still following the tiny glows. A gentle breeze moved through the branches, sending the final petals spiraling down in ones and twos. Night settled fully, cool and fragrant with new leaves. Crickets sang steadily from hidden places in the moss. The family stepped inside when the air grew noticeably cooler. Futons were spread near the open screens. Quilts were light cotton once more, barely needed against the mild night. Akiko tucked the children in with gentle hands, smoothing quilts, brushing stray petals from their hair. Hiroshi dimmed the lanterns until only the faintest glow remained, enough to see the pale shapes of petals scattered across the tatami like quiet stars. The house grew still. Wood cooled slowly, screens whispering in the night breeze. Outside, the cherry trees stood taller now in their green dresses, the last petals falling through the dark hours. Silent, unhurried, returning to the earth below. By morning, the branches would show only fresh leaves, the brief pink season complete and gone without regret. Inside, the family slept deeply, breaths slow and even, matching the gentle rhythm of leaves rustling in the night wind. The garden rested beside them, green and serene, already holding the quiet promise of the next slow turning. Everything remained simple, gentle, and perfectly as it was. The merchant's garden settled into the calm green of early summer, once the last cherry. Petals had fallen away. New leaves now covered every branch fully, soft at first, then deepening to a rich, steady emerald as the days lengthened. The light beneath the trees turned clear and dappled again, patterns shifting slowly across the moss and stones with each passing hour. Akiko noticed how the garden seemed to breathe more deeply now, leaves rustling in low, constant conversation whenever a breeze moved through. She stood on the engawa one quiet morning, hands loose at her sides, simply listening to the familiar sound return. Hiroshi opened the screens wide to the warm air. Breakfast carried the lightness of the season, cold rice topped, with pickled ginger and a sprinkle of sesame, chilled miso soup with cubes of tofu and thin slices of cucumber, fresh green tea poured into cups still warm from rinsing. The family ate slowly on the veranda, bare feet against the smooth wood, watching tiny insects drift among the leaves overhead. Miko traced the shape of a leaf shadow on the boards with one finger. Kenji followed a butterfly that fluttered close before, drifting away toward the canal. The neighborhood moved with easy summer rhythm. Hiroshi walked his usual path to the shop, passing under eaves where morning glories opened pale trumpets to the sun. The canal water sparkled clearer now, reflecting the full green of trees along its banks. At the shop, customers sought practical pieces for warmer days. Small trays for serving chilled sweets, fans with smooth, lacquered handles. He greeted them calmly, offering cool tea from a clay pot kept in the shade. The wrapping paper he used was thin and light, folding with the softest touch, string tied in careful knots that sat flat and neat. Akiko tended the garden through the morning hours. She watered the moss early, before the sun climbed too high, letting droplets bead on the surface like scattered pearls before they sank away. She trimmed the low azaleas so their leaves stayed neat, snipping only what was needed with small, precise cuts. The gravel patterns she raked each day were gentle and flowing, soft, curves that seemed to follow the shape of the wind itself. When she finished, she sat for a while beneath the cherry trees, hands resting in her lap, feeling the warmth settle around her like a quiet blanket. Miko and Kenji spent long stretches outside. Miko carried a shallow basin of water to moisten the stepping stones, pouring slowly so each drop spread evenly. Kenji followed with his small rake, smoothing any footprints left in the gravel. They worked in companionable silence most of the time, pausing now and then to watch a leaf tremble or a dragonfly hover above the moss. Their movements matched the garden's own slow pace, never hurried, never loud. Midday brought the fullest warmth. Akiko lowered the reed blinds, turning the rooms into cool, green-tinted spaces. The tatami felt smooth and slightly damp under bare skin. The children napped briefly near the open engawa, heads resting on folded arms, faces turned toward the rustling leaves. Akiko sat nearby with a small fan of folded paper, moving it in slow arcs to stir the air. A cicada called from high in the branches, its steady drone rising, holding, then fading before beginning again farther away. Hiroshi returned as the light began to soften. The sky had turned a pale, milky gold at the edges. He carried a small bundle, ripe peaches from the market, their skins fuzzy and warm from the day's sun. Akiko sliced them carefully, juice running clear along the knife. The family shared the pieces on the veranda, eating slowly, tasting the deep sweetness that summer ripened so perfectly. A drop sometimes fell onto the boards. It dried slowly in the warm air. As evening arrived, the heat eased by gentle degrees. Lanterns were lit along the garden paths and under the eaves. Their warm glow mixed with the fading green of the leaves, creating soft pools of light across the moss. Supper was cooling and simple. Chilled salmon noodles in clear broth with mint leaves floating on top. Grilled river fish brushed lightly with salt. A small dish of cucumber slices pickled with shiso. They ate facing the garden, where the cherry trees now stood tall and full-leaved under the deepening sky. After the meal, they lingered outside longer. Hiroshi poured cool barley tea into cups. Akiko fanned herself with slow, even strokes. The children watched. Fireflies appear among the stones, tiny green lights blinking on and off in their patient dance. Miko whispered their name once, more, Hotaru, as a few drifted close, enough to touch the air near her hand. Kenji leaned against his father, eyes growing heavy but still following. The small glows until they vanished. Into the dark leaves, night settled fully. Crickets sang from every corner of the garden. Steady, overlapping, never rushed. A soft wind moved through the branches, sending a long, whispering sigh across the leaves. The family stepped inside only when the first true coolness touched their skin. Futons were spread near the open screens. Quilts were light cotton, barely needed. Akiko tucked the edges with gentle care. Hiroshi dimmed the lanterns until their glow was no brighter than starlight through paper. The house grew still, holding the day's warmth in its wooden bones. Outside, the cherry trees stood motionless under a sky thick with stars. Leaves rustled faintly now and then, a sound so soft it blended with breathing. Fireflies continued their quiet lights above the moss. The garden rested, green and warm, patient in its unchanging rhythm. Inside, the family drifted into sleep. Breaths slow, deep, even, matching the gentle rise and fall of summer leaves in the night wind. Time moved gently onward in the merchant's home and garden, season after season, year after year, always in the same calm circle. The cherry trees stood through it all, bare in winter's hush, budding softly in spring, full-leaved and green through summer, turning gold and copper in autumn before letting their leaves fall once more. Each cycle felt familiar, comforting, never rushed. Hiroshi and Akiko grew a little older with the turning years, their movements slower perhaps, their voices quieter still, but the rhythm of their days remained steady and kind. Miko and Kenji grew too. Miko learned to prepare the morning rice just as her mother did, measuring the grains with careful hands, watching the steam rise in slow curls. She swept the garden paths with the same gentle broom, raking gravel into patterns that flowed like water toward the trees. Kenji, taller now, carried heavier buckets of water for the moss, poured them with the same patience he had always shown. He still folded origami when the afternoons grew drowsy, placing cranes and boats in neat rows on the low table, though his fingers moved with more sureness. The house itself aged quietly beside them. Tatami mats were replaced every few years, always with the same fresh grass scent. Wooden beams darkened a little more with time, holding the glow of lanterns as warmly as ever. The sliding screens still moved smoothly in their grooves, opening each morning to let in the day's first light, closing each night to hold the family close. The small garden never grew larger, yet it always felt just right. Stones in their places, moss soft underfoot, cherry branches reaching the same gentle height above the eaves. Some mornings, Hiroshi still walked to his shop, though more often now he stayed home, letting a trusted apprentice tend the lacquer pieces. He sat on the engawa instead, watching the light move across the garden, hands resting in his lap. Akiko joined him there many days, a cup of tea between them, steam rising slowly as they listened to the leaves or the faint drip of rain from the roof. They spoke little, content in the silence they had built together over so many seasons. The children, when they were ready, began to carry small parts of the family's life into the world beyond the garden gate. Miko helped at a neighbor's tea house on quiet afternoons, learning to pour matcha with the same unhurried grace her mother used at home. Kenji sometimes carried messages or small packages through the streets, bowing politely to those he met, returning with stories told in soft voices. Yet they always came back before evening, stepping out of their geta at the entrance, washing their hands at the stone basin, joining the family once more on the engawa or around the low table. Suppers remained simple through the years. Rice, fish, or vegetables from the market. Miso warmed over charcoal. Tea poured into cups warmed first. They ate facing the garden, watching the light fade from the sky, petals or leaves drifting down according to the season. After the meal, they sometimes sat longer, listening to crickets or bell crickets, to the soft wind moving through the branches, to the distant temple bell ringing once, twice, low and slow. When night came fully, lanterns were dimmed to their faintest glow. Futons were spread near the open screens or closer to the hibachi in colder months. Quilts were smoothed, edges tucked with gentle hands. The house settled around them, wood creaking faintly as it cooled, screens whispering in the breeze, the garden breathing its own quiet outside. Through every season, the cherry trees continued their patient work. Blossoms opened each spring in pale pink beauty, held for their brief, perfect days, then fell softly to cover the moss in layers of gentle color. Leaves grew green and full in summer, turned warm shades in autumn, rested bare through winter. Petals and leaves drifted down year after year, returning to the earth, nourishing the moss, the stones, the roots below. Nothing was ever lost, only changed, slowly, quietly, beautifully. Inside the house, the family slept as they always had. Breaths slow and even, rising and falling together like the tide of a calm sea. Hiroshi's hand sometimes rested lightly on Akiko's in the dark. The children sighed once or twice before settling deeper. The lanterns burned to nothing but embers. The night wrapped them all in its soft arms. Outside, the garden kept its silent watch. Cherry petals or autumn leaves or snowflakes fell through the hours, covering the world in softness. The trees stood tall and patient, holding their place in the quiet turning of time. Everything remained as it had always been. Simple, gentle, unchanging in its deep and peaceful rhythm. The seasons continued. The family rested. The garden dreamed, and all was well.